Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Let's take a look at the United Nations General Assembly. It's been an exciting show of political wisdom. We've also seen a clash of different perspectives. This was epitomized when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi quashed the accusations, unfounded accusations, in fact, coming from U.S. President Donald Trump. Representing China, Minister Wang will make his speech today, later in the General Assembly. Before our discussion, let's review some of the memorable moments in the UNGA this time.
President Trump has often warned that the U.S. has become the butt of global jokes. And with a surprising boast on Tuesday, he fulfilled that prophecy.
They do not want me or us to win because I am the first president ever to challenge China on trade. We don't want them to meddle or interfere in our upcoming election. And I like China.
It's not the first time Trump has pointed his finger at China without any details to support his accusation. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who sat just 2 seats away from the president, was seen casting a glance at Trump and shrugging his shoulders. Mr. Wang then firmly refuted the allegation.
Before I conclude, I need to point out that China has all along followed the principle of non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs. This is the tradition of Chinese foreign policy.
Mr. Trump's claims were not just limited to China. When he addressed the UN and boasted about his achievements, he was surprised by the spontaneous giggles erupting from diplomats and heads of states.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi is expected to deliver a speech at the general debate. According to reports, his speech will focus on rejecting protectionism and unilateralism. He will also draw on regional issues like denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. From trade to politics to military ties, tensions are on the rise from all fronts for the world's 2 largest economies. The Sino-US trade conflict now affects around $250 billion worth of Chinese imports. In a meeting with Maria Garcés, president of the 73rd UNGA this Tuesday, Minister Wang called on the UNGA to uphold multilateralism, maintain the UN Charter, and safeguard rules of international relations.
For more discussion about the upcoming speech by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the UNGA, and also China's debate with the world about where the UN is going, I'm joined in our Beijing studio, Rongying, Vice President of CIIS, and that is the China Institute of International Studies. Also in Beijing, we have James Zimmerman, Chairman Emeritus with the American Chamber of Commerce in China. And in Southampton, Mike Bastin, Professor at the University of Southampton. I want to welcome all of you, gentlemen, starting with you, Mr. Rong. Minister Wang starting a lot of multilateral visits and also interactions with the heads of states and foreign ministers this time.
State Councilor Minister Wang Yi. After all, this is the first ever sort of General Assembly meeting for Wang Yi when he was appointed as a State Councilor and also Foreign Minister. And I think it is also a big, very good opportunity for China's diplomacy. I mean, to make itself clear what its positions on these regional global issues, and more importantly about what kind of role UN China feels is supposed to play. So this is, I think, an important occasion. This is certainly, I think, it's an occasion for China's diplomacy.
Mr. Zimmerman, of course, there's a lot of debate between China and the U.S. about whether China is meddling in the election. That's the accusation coming from President Trump. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi responded very well. And certainly, he is likely to deal with the bilateral issues as well in this multilateral platform.
The comments by Trump were totally inappropriate. It was a way I think it was demonizing China, and it was without any factual foundation at all. Most likely was for two reasons. One is because you've got these midterm elections coming up, and he may be getting nervous about what the results may be, and there's no better way to blame somebody if there's any potential losses. Secondly, it's just another way to try to put pressure on China with respect to the trade issues, but I don't think any of this is really going to work. And part of it is because there was a lack of substantiation. And secondly, true diplomacy requires that the parties reach a consensus, that they work together to resolve some difficult issues. And blaming or demonizing China is not the appropriate strategy. It's just a tactic.
Professor Bassin, how do you see that bilateral accusations going on in this multilateral platform, like the UN?
Well, I agree with your American panelist with just about everything that was said about Trump's accusations against China, totally without factual foundation. I also would like to add, I think it's a bit of a smokescreen. It sort of diverts attention away from Russia and Putin, and that's really not good for Trump and his administration. So I think that's partly behind it. It's backfired already. He's further and further detached. And I think also, like your American panelist said, he's very, very worried about the midterm elections. And he's trying to appeal to the core sort of American working class voter that put him in the first place, and hoping that this sort of belligerent rhetoric really does resonate with them. And let's hope it doesn't.
Well, it really depends now, Mr. Rong, about China's approach. China will do what? Will China and the UN be able to handle a United Nations in which the United States has been quite passive and is likely to remain quite passive for years to come at this point?
Yeah, I think China has made it very clear, and it has been the builder of contributor of the current international system, and it will continue to do that in a more sort of proactive and constructive way. And the UN is being the most sort of authoritative, representative, and universal intergovernment organization. And it is being a sort of stage where I think a rising power like China and can shape the agenda, play a role, and not only for the sake of its own interest, but more importantly, for the common goods of the region and the world. And remember that at the 19th Party Congress late last year, China has put forward two most important sort of visions or thinkings about China's diplomacy, or diplomacy with Chinese character, major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics. That is to promote the building a new type of international relations, and also a kind of community of shared future for mankind.
Right.
And so that is really an occasion, an opportunity for China to deliberate, to show, and more importantly, to take the lead in shaping and promoting the UN, pushing the UN to play a more important role for the common development.
Professor Bassin, now we heard that the Chinese Foreign Minister, Mr. Wang Yi, has been interacting with the Foreign Minister, Secretary of the EU, and also coming from emerging economies, the BRICS countries, as well as some of the other developing countries. So obviously, the Chinese side is trying to start this multilateral conversation at this year's UNGA about the new initiatives and new input coming from these rising economies and rising voices. But the question really also is, to what extent will that be able to maintain and even develop the United Nations further, with the fact that there is quite a passive United States?
Well, there will be, I'm not sure passive, there will be quite active concern. in the United States and the administration, the Trump administration. But the fact of the matter is, the EU and China, partly as a result of Trump, but partly a result of a shift in the balance of power across the world economy, are coming closer and closer. And the European Union do recognize that China is very much leading the rapid emergence of these emerging BRICS nations and other satellite nations with the Belt and Road Initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The Americans were very much opposed to European nations signing up to that. They signed up duly, very, very willingly. So I think this will continue. I think the American voice will be heard, but it will not carry the same amount of power at all as it has done. And the fact of the matter is, the EU and China and Asia in particular will work closer and closer.
Well, really, Mr. Zimmerman, that the U.S. voice in this multilateral discussion, even though it exists, but certainly will not carry the used to be significance anymore, as Professor Bastian argued.
I think that's a big mistake. I mean, multilateralism is just another name for teamwork, where countries get together to work out complex issues like cybersecurity or terrorism, human rights, and so forth. They really need to do that in a multilateral forum. China has been a beneficiary of the multilateral forums such as the World Bank, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization. They have benefited, and so China should continue to embrace multilateralism. And it doesn't matter what the United States does, but the U.S. at some point, it is going to come back to the fold and realize that's the only way that they can solve some of these complex global issues.
But Mr. Rong, I mean, it used to be the U.S. election affecting bilateral relations, that people understand about that fact. But now the U.S. election, indirectly, in a big way, is already affecting the existence of the international system, the system that the United States originally helped brick by brick to build. So at this point, what will be the future of this international system? Will China provide, together with the others, the new remedy?
Well, China certainly would try its best, but I'm not sure I think we'll be able to replace the role of the United States, nor to assume the leadership, but rather China has been, I think, more actively to provide a kind of so-called Chinese wisdom or Chinese solution in the hope that as the world becomes more integrated, more interdependent and interconnected, and the multilateralism, I mean, represented by UN system, would be, I mean, continue, and as I've shown, and by the general debates, the speeches, they're all expressed either concerns of the unilateralism and nationalism, I mean, by the Trump administration, or the hope that, I mean, multilateralism will continue, and with China and the EU and other countries, particularly I think developing countries. After all, I think multilateralism in this world, a globalized world, multilateralism is I think one of the most sort of effective way to deal with or handle and address the issues that are facing this world.
But Mr. Rong, there's one issue that we really have to handle right now. That is, if the world's two largest economies, if one of the world's most important bilateral relations is showing its ill side to the rest of the world, right in front of the rest of the world, at the United Nations General Assembly, which is only being held every year when it comes to this yearly debate, what does that mean to others' confidence about our world? And what kinds of role model are the rest of the world watching?
I think China has been tried its best to tell the world. I think and to tell the United States. I think as we have seen that if I talk about specific issue of the trade, we have very recently the Chinese government issued the white paper on the trade dispute between the United States, explaining in details about the causes and the position of that. And China on the general overall relationship with the United States, China made it very clear it continued to want to see a stable relationship, constructive relationship, and the past 40 years of China's relationship with the United States showed that despite the fact that there are differences or even disputes, cooperation is the only way to for a stable relationship, and China will continue to do that. But the concern is always there. As the Chinese officials, I think also the foreign minister himself made it very clear that, the relationship is really, I think, in a
Critical moment.
critical moment.
Exactly.
Indeed. It is
Mr.
also shared by the American scholars and the strategic communities.
Mr. Zimmerman, what about that? The same question to you as well.
Yeah.
What kind of role model?
I'm, as an American, first and foremost, I'm embarrassed, all right? And watching our president up on the stage has been a very embarrassing, tense moment for a lot of people. But I'm also optimistic. I'm optimistic because we do have a history of multilateral organizations that have led the world. It is not a perfect system, but it does work in a lot of ways. And at some point, this president is either going to realize that his strategy is a non-strategy, it's mostly tactics, and he is going to either learn from his mistakes, or a new administration is going to come in and do it for him. Because we have to really get back to global cooperation, and it's got to be fairly soon, given where we're at right now. So we'll have to see what happens in the midterm elections.
Well, you are quite optimistic in the long term, at least, Mr. Zimmerman. I all wish we could share your optimism. After all, that's what we need right now. But Professor Bastian, for the very near term, particularly in the next 2 to 3 years, we're likely to see further dramatic developments if things are not going to the right direction between the two largest economies, and two very different ideas about how the world should be like. One is about embrace the rest of the world. The other is about let's just talk about us. What would that mean for the other economies? Do they have to stand in team, choosing one side or the other? And what would that mean for any policy debate, whether at the UN or anywhere else in the world? Mr. Professor Bastian.
That leaves the other countries, the other trading blocs in a very invidious position. And I'd like to come back to Mr. Zimmerman's comment about the point about America. America was always welcome at the table, so you always leave the door open and you always encourage a more multilateralist approach, even from Trump, so you remain optimistic. But you're right, in the next 2 to 3 years, it could well be, and most commentators agree that Trump should be re-elected for a second term, so we're stuck with him for quite some years. It will be a very, very difficult, rocky road ahead. I suspect it will just lead to further integration across Asia and Europe, who will go ahead with some sort of quasi-multilateralist approach, and the Americans will be left so far behind that they will probably try to play catch up in a quite sort of panic-stricken measure once Trump is finally booted out.
Mr. Rong, economical and trade-wise, China will have many partners to work with for the future. But of course, there is a divide about the economic and trade issues and the geopolitical issues. So how will China be able to balance the two aspects of issues very well and have a clear mind, while at the same time, a very cool mind in terms of what China is likely to face for the future?
I think China so far has shown a sort of strong sense of cool-mindedness, and by not sort of linking the trade issues or specific issues with the overall relation and the future. But I feel, and I share certainly a lot, our panelists sort of optimism in the long term, but I also have some concern, quite serious concern about the near future, because as we've seen that in the past few months, particularly in recent weeks, we have seen the United States, the Trump administration, because they want to push for pressure on China, and they are sort of provoking more issues, particularly related to geopolitics. For example, the arms sales to Taiwan. This is a very sort of most sensitive and important issue for China for the bilateral relationship between China and the United States.
And the South China Sea
South
as
China
well.
Sea as well, and also the human rights issues and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of kind of concern that this relationship is really, really, I think, going in the wrong direction. That's why I think the Chinese ambassador to U.S. very recently, possibly yesterday, at the annual or the national reception, he made a speech that the China and the U.S. relationship now facing a historical choice. It echoed, that I saw the statement echoed to some of the American scholars sort of concerned that possibly the relationship, the recent development has shown that might have reached to the inflection point, which, it's again very much a kind of a warning or expression of concern. So we need to I think, work hard and work together.
Mr. Zimmerman, on the one hand, you see it could be about the potential of the two economies, the potential of the two countries, as to how they see each other and how they will deal with one another. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you have very strong influence of American politics in the right now realities and possible policy choices about how the U.S. will deal with China. That has nothing to do with the real nature of this bilateral relationship, but rather how politicized this relationship can be in Washington. Which side do you think, Mr. Zimmerman, frankly speaking, we are facing right now? A real sound analysis about where U.S. and China should be, despite of the fact there are harsh policies coming from the U.S. side, or pure political motivated directions that has been coming out toward the bilateral relations?
I think you keep in mind that there is a diversity of views in the U.S. A lot of people see things much differently. A lot of people view China as a cooperative partner. So there is clearly a difference of views that we see. I think China should stay the course on multilateralism. And eventually the United States is going to, or the Trump administration is going to learn two things from China. The first is that isolationism doesn't work. China experienced that for about 50, 60 years and realized it doesn't work. The second thing that the U.S. is going to learn is that a wall keeps nobody out. And so, there's a lot to learn from China, and the U.S. can learn quite a bit. And that's something that both administrations should, in their diplomacy, realize is both sides are equal and not competitors, and we can learn from one another.
Right. James Zimmerman, Mike Bastian, last but not least, Rong Ying. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and sharing your wisdom and insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.